Quote, "In time we shall be in a position to bestow on South Africa the greatest possible gift, a more human face." End quote. Well, who said that? The late, great Steve Biko, of course. But you may be a little disheartened to hear that Biko and the Black Consciousness movement may be, to some extent, less of a focus in future school history studies if the Basic Education Ministry's current proposed revision of the history curriculum for grades 4 to 12 is finally approved. The 1652 and the Jan van Riebeeck spiel may also enjoy less impetus should the revision, as gazetted, get the go-ahead, reports our education journalist, Prega Govender, next.
There's a big shift or move away from the Eurocentric, to an African-centered curriculum. While previously huge emphasis was placed on, the Dutch East India Company and Jan van Riebeeck, especially in the lower grades, this emphasis has now been sort of watered down. It will be open for public comments for a period of 30 days, and thereafter the department will, look at these submissions.
And of course, we'll end off with On This Day in South African History. That's when the long and winding Trans-Kalahari Highway opened on this day in 1998.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
In Rugby's Pointless Braai Quiz, who's the well-known Springbok lock leaving the Stormers at the end of their rugby season? I'll give you that answer a little later.
This is The Lead, and this is the South African Story, with your host, Graeme Robenheimer.
Moving to our top story today, and our resident education journalism extraordinaire Prega Govender is live with us now from our Randburg studios to discuss the Basic Education Ministry's proposed revision of our high school history books and the potential positives as well as negatives that these may bring in that revision. How's it, Prega? Always lacquer to have you on The Lead, and I'm really salivating at the topic we're getting into today.
All good, Graeme. Welcome, and thanks for having me on your show.
Did you know this? Today is, of course, the 8th of April, talking about history. But did you know on this day in 1602, that's when the Dutch East India Company first decided to form in the year 1602. Did you know that?
Well, wow. No, I didn't.
Which I find so fascinating, Prega, is because it comes just 2 days after on this day in history, on the 6th of April, but just 50 years later on that very day in 1652, of course, a year very synonymous with history, but Jan van Riebeeck arrived at the Cape of Good Hope, and that's just been part and parcel of our history textbooks for the longest time, hasn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And very interesting stats, eh?
Very, that just in the small space of time as we're having this discussion, it all seemingly, linked up. And that's what I love about history, is that it oftentimes, rhymes, and we end up, finding these interesting linkages. Let's chat a little bit anecdotally. When, if I may, dare ask you, when did you matriculate and did you study history?
Yeah, going down memory lane, Graeme. Yes, I matriculated, if memory serves me right, in the 1970s, around 75, 76, I think. Yeah, I did study history. In fact, it was one of my favorite subjects, and really, really enjoyed it.
Do you remember, what was covered? I mean, that's... the 70s are a hectic period in of themselves. But
exactly.
Do you remember, was it very global or was it very African in what you studied?
Quite westernized, I think. We looked at topics like the French Revolution, the Great Trek and the First and Second World War, among a list of others. But these are some of the ones I can sort of remember.
And what strikes me, Prega, is that didn't change all that much. Everything you've just sort of listed there is what I sort of looked at when I matriculated in 2008. A heavy focus on World War II, Anglo-Boer War, the origins of the Khoi San. It's just, and again, French Revolution, all of those sort of main themes. But now as it stands, it looks like, the Basic Education Ministry under Minister Siviwe Hwahube has gazetted, these changes. What are the general sort of themes and or storylines that are now set to face the guillotine, as they say?
Okay, yeah. Well, talking about guillotines, the French Revolution, for one, is facing the chop. It is currently being taught at the grade 10 level. And together with that, we're looking at the South African War, or the Anglo-Boer War, in grade 10. And if I remember, in the grade 12 syllabus, the big one would be the U.S. civil rights and U.S. civil rights figures like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. So that section is also being phased out, or very little emphasis would be placed on that in the grade 12 curriculum. And yes, in grade 11, communism in Russia, as well as capitalism in the USA, the period of the Great Depression, among others. So that is going to be left out of your grade 11 syllabus. I must be honest with you. I mean, we're talking about changes and revisions to the history curriculum from grade 4 up to grade 12. But there are obviously changes in the curricula lower down, but I haven't yet gone through them because the national curriculum statement for grades 4 to 6, 7 to 9, and 10 to 12 is quite voluminous. But I will do so in due course.
Yeah, you're only one person. I'm sure you'll get to it. It's quite a lot to wade through, and of course, there's many different.
Absolutely.
There's many different timelines. History's so broad, right?
Yeah, I agree with you totally.
What do we know about what's going to be done away with in regards to 1652 and the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck? And of course, in contemporary times, we've had some fantastic historians come out and show up the image of Jan in during the apartheid era as being somewhat of a charlatan. Not only was the portrait not really of him, he was also inherently, like many figure holders of that period, in and itself corrupt. I mean, the VOC, was an early form of capitalism in its own right. So what is being done away with in regards to that being taught in schools? It's less of a white European centric focus, right?
Yeah. So there's a big shift or move away from the Eurocentric, to an African-centered curriculum. And as you rightfully point out, Jan van Riebeeck was, widely studied, as you would probably know as well, prior in 1994. And the document, which speaks of the amendments, talks of the history curriculum putting the experiences and achievements of Europeans, mainly males, at the center of the narrative of South Africa. So basically, the story began with the Dutch traders under Jan van Riebeeck and the establishment of the refreshment station at the Cape of Good Hope in 1652, as well as the British takeover of the Cape Colony and the conflicts subsequently that culminated in the Great Trek. But while previously huge emphasis was placed on the Dutch East India Company and Jan van Riebeeck, especially in the lower grades, this emphasis has now been sort of watered down. As mentioned, earlier, I still need to find out how much of it is taught in the lower grades. But I've been speaking to a teacher friend, who indicated that, yes, the emphasis has been toned down,
And I think, generally speaking, where we find ourselves as modern historians these days and speaking to, doctorate holders at universities, they'll be quick to tell you that this appears to be the correct approach, right? To bring in more multi-perspectives, more voices that were on the peripheries of how history is being taught for the longest time, and to bring those in so that we can have a more holistic history. The decolonization of history is such a massive proponent within academic circles at the moment. I do take issue, Prega, and this is just from my perspective, and it's somewhat of an informed opinion, but less of a focus on a major conflict like the Second Anglo-Boer War, as you rightfully called it, the South African War, as it's also known. I take a bit of umbrage with that because it's a very pivotal moment. For example, there's in 1902, there's the Vereniging Treaty, and that's where, for the very first time, it's put in black and white that the black majority in Southern Africa will be deprived of their political voting rights. And I think that is such an interesting piece of information and a nugget that eventually, it sees the setting up of the Union of South Africa. It sees the setting up of the ANC in 1912. That should be taught in high schools, because I wasn't taught that. Yes.
No, I totally agree with you there. Graeme, but I just wanted to also make the point that while it may be removed from the grade 10 curriculum, I think it is, it may still be taught lower down, So this is not to say that it is going to be completely erased from the history books.
Okay.
I still need to check whether it's going to be taught, in the grades, in your grade 9, 8, 7, 6, for example, But you raise a very valid point. If we leave out the Anglo-Boer War, we would be leaving out essentially quite an important slice of history. The Anglo-Boer War shaped the course of South African history through Afrikaner nationalism. And as you rightfully pointed out, it established the basis for the Union of South Africa in 1910.
100%.
Yeah. So it remains to be seen whether it has been excised from the other grades, So
yeah, we're going to see. Obviously, in the proof will be in the education pudding, as we say.
Yeah. But as it stands, the amended curriculum makes no provision for the Anglo-Boer in grade 10, which is currently being taught in grade 10.
Right. Okay, let's talk about, very broadly, because, as you've already alluded to, it's going to require a little bit more sleuthing to go through all of the syllabuses. But which themes and or timelines are set to be introduced within these gazetted provisions as put forward by the Basic Education Ministry? I think you mentioned in your latest piece for News 24, which is entitled "End of an Era, Jan van Riebeeck will no longer dominate school history books," and I think that word "dominate" is very important. It's more a shift to who are these very interesting figures that have dominated the South African headlines, over the past 300 years. I think, is that where, the teaching will now shift to?
Yeah, so basically, which has always been the case, we have topics spread over the 4 terms, the school terms, in each of the grades. And you will find, for example, topics in one of the grades. We have P.W. Botha, the Prime Minister in 1978.
The Groot Crocodile?
Crocodile, yeah. And we also find Oliver Tambo, the president of the ANC, I think during the from 1967 to 1991, I think it was. So yes, there's a greater focus on individual figures, which is a good thing, and more emphasis being placed, or rather less emphasis being placed, for example, on the U.S. civil society protests, which is being excised from from the grade 12 curriculum.
Yeah, and if I look back to my experience in high school, there wasn't a large shift on Steve Biko and the Black consciousness movement. So it's been quite amazing to see that evolve in the context of how South African schools teach that. I've been happy to sort of see that evolve over time, but it looks as if that's also going to be less of the focus going forward. And I don't know if we also take umbrage with that as well, because, the 1976 Soweto uprising is also this huge point in South African history, because there is this argument to be made that between 66 and 76, it's what academics call the high apartheid era, because a lot of the resistance to apartheid had been, plunged deep underground. So the stories there matter. And here, we see the youth uprise in 76, and it's this new wave of a moment being felt in South Africa. And I feel like, removing that from the curricula is also a bit of a point of concern, in my opinion.
Yes, I totally agree with you on that score as well. So during my research, I spoke to several academics, including one from Northwest University, Mr. David Olivier, and talking about the Black consciousness movement and Steve Biko. Olivier was of the opinion that, South African resistance to apartheid was unique in many respects, but that it did not develop in isolation. He mentioned, for example, that anti-apartheid activism formed part of wider international traditions of civil rights protests, and global movements helped shape both strategies and solidarity networks over time, So he was also a bit worried about this shift.
But I suppose, when things are gazetted, they're gazetted for a reason, so that we can all sort of, have our say, have our, point of debate on the matter. Where do we stand with that gazetting process? Do you know what is expected to happen at this point? I know it came through on the 20th of March. Is that right?
March. Yes. Yeah, so it will be open for public comments for a period of 30 days. And thereafter, the department will, look at these submissions and take note of them and finally, decide on the new curriculum.
Right. So we've got quite a bit of time, and obviously South Africans can get involved, and because it has been this, lurking issue, I think, that often comes up in, current affairs debates and topics in more recent years is, how do we reform how history is taught in high school? Multi-perspectivity, I think both of you and I totally agree that needs to be the focus, and a shift to telling more, African stories by Africans. I mean, I'm fully on board with that. But there are also concerns, as you've raised in your latest piece, regarding generally around, how teachers would prepare for this and the availability of resources. I mean, those are general challenges that have dominated the education sector space for such a long time now. And here, if there's a sudden shift, I mean, that onboarding process, I would imagine, would take quite long, especially in rural areas.
Absolutely. Talking about, teacher preparedness and resources, I mean, the big issue is going to be, the publishing of completely new textbooks, based on the new curriculum. And we are talking about publishing new textbooks from grade 4 up to grade 12, which will obviously be a mammoth task. So yes, there will be, that will have to be considered. And also the fact that being a new curriculum, amended obviously in some grades, we'll probably have to get teachers reorientated, to teach the new topics. So yes, definitely there's still a lot of work to be done going forward.
I know that you reported this in February, but experts were alarmed at the time of only 15% of grade 3s at the moment can't read a single word. When we look at those literacy levels, I mean, that is such an indicative problem at large of what we're currently facing in the education sector. Just very briefly, that report by the 2030 reading panel. I mean, how concerning is that?
Very concerning, Graeme. And you hit it on the nail. I mean, 15% can't read at all is hugely problematic. And at the grade 4 level, as you know, 80% of grade 4s can't read with comprehension. So this is going to be quite a problem that the department and the provinces would have to try and overcome. Because, I mean, history is measured by the amount of reading that learners, are involved in,
It's a lot of sources.
Yes. I mean, as you mentioned, there's so many sources that they have to go to. And if you can't comprehend, that's going to be hugely difficult, excuse me, to say the least.
Hypothetically, Prega, we can end off anecdotally again like we started. But if you were in high school today and you were in matric and you were studying history, what would be like the one topic within history that you would like to learn a lot more about, seeing as both of us did history at different times?
During my high school days, the anti-apartheid struggle was very much a focus point. The 1976 Soweto uprising took place, I think, when I was in matric or a year later, when I was at university, first year studying. So, I would have wished for us to have had, a more greater depth in terms of the content that we were taught, because our we had very limited knowledge of the anti-apartheid struggle in the school history books at the time. So I would say that is one of the things I would have loved to have studied in greater depth.
Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that, because by 2008, I feel many of the figureheads, many of the important dates, many of the important, contextual, whether it's events or, contextual locations of which of those events, I felt like there was a huge gap in what I understood. That by the time, I did my history master's, Prega, I felt like I had to go back and read a lot more to fill in the blanks, to get where I wanted to be eventually. But anyway, thank you so much for this chat today. I really do appreciate it. It's very insightful, and it offers us a glimpse into what may be in the coming year or so. It's going to be an interesting space to watch. And my heart definitely goes out to teachers who have to suddenly pivot. And I also feel a sense of excitement, hopefully, for many budding history students in the offering who may see this as a potential to either become an academic or a journalist like you and I. Prega Govender on News 24's The Lead. I really do appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Graeme. I really enjoyed it.
Looking for a smarter weekend scroll? The Weekender is your ultimate guide to bold stories, sharp opinion, and a fresh lens on life in Mzansi. From exclusive interviews and powerful essays to wine picks, playlists, and pop culture gems, it's your perfect weekend read all in one place, landing every Saturday on News 24. And finally,
ending off now with On This Day in South African History, that's courtesy the SA History online database. Well, on this very day, that's the 8th of April 1998, the Trans-Kalahari Highway was officially opened to the broader public. At the time, this was the very first route in sub-Saharan Africa to link the Atlantic and Indian Oceans via Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, as well as Mozambique. Yes, folks, that's a 2 to 3 day road trip by car. That's 30 hours of driving over some 3,000 kilometers. The road's launch came with the promise of boosting cross-border trade, and travelers often spot local wildlife along the way. Definitely one for the books if you're up to road tripping. And in Roby's Pointless Braai quiz for today, who's the well-known Springbok lock leaving the Stormers at the end of their current rugby season? Well, the news is that it's Salman Murat. The Stormers team's confirmed the very latest, with speculation that Murat may be heading to the top 14 outfit La Rochelle in France, although that's not been outrightly confirmed at this point. Of course, he's captained both the Stormers and the Boks and says he's keen, according to News 24 Sports, Herman Mostert, to return to the Western Cape side, hopefully one day soon. Well, if this was your answer, congrats! You score the priceless prize of being the most informed person around the Braai Place. Thanks so much for tuning into The Lead. Of course, we've got one more episode this week dropping this Thursday at 7 p.m. All ahead of that DA elective Congress scheduled for this weekend. Keep it here on News 24 for rolling coverage of all the political developments there. My name's Graeme Robenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll have The Lead.